Howdy y'all, Sage Man here. Sorry for the delay. When was the last one of these? A month ago? Yeah, I've done much worse. Trying to turn the channel around. Set up a buffer. Off to a bad start. I'm recording this less than an hour before when the retrospective was actually supposed to premiere. I'll get the hang of this. I won't let this one be late by more than a matter of hours. So today, we're dealing with the last 3 episodes of The Little Mermaid Season 2. Next 2 spectives will be about the 8 episodes of the 3rd and final season, and then the 10th one of these will be about looking back on the entire series. And then Gargoyles. I recorded those Gargoyles retrospectives well over a year ago, knowing I wouldn't be posting them until I was finished with The Little Mermaid, but didn't anticipate to take, 2020 threw off all our schedules, I'm sure. For those of you just joining us, most of my journey on this channel has been about exploring a vast amount of Disney-related media to gather inspiration for Keys and Kingdoms, a role-playing game system and fantasy world meant to feel as if it takes place in Disney's universe. 'Cause I don't think Disney's making one. Be sure to check out the TAPAS podcast for my progress through Disney's various feature films. Season 2, Episode 7 is called A Tale of Two Crabs. Tail, spelled like the thing hanging off your tuchus. My god. It's annoying enough when some crappy piece of kids' media thinks it's being clever by calling a story a tale and then spelling it tail, but crabs don't have tails, you dumb motherfuckers. You can't even do this horrible title trope, right, by making your tale be about an animal that actually has a tail. Anyway, the episode summary says Sebastian is threatened by an arch-rival. So, this is the only episode today I know nothing about going in. Let's see it. You know what just occurred to me? I think I may have noticed this way back when I was young. I'm not sure. But in the theme song, they do a bit of editing. You know, the title theme is all clips from episodes, it seems. And at the climax of the tune, Sebastian breaches the water and soars through the air. And while he's getting that big air, Ariel and Flounder seemingly come up to the surface to watch him, and then he takes a bit of a tumble, and Ariel helps him up. Except you can quickly tell that the part where Ariel watches him is actually edited in from a different scene somewhere in the series because Sebastian is actually on Ariel's shoulder at that moment. So, she can't really be watching him fly right then, can she? Film editing, so deceptive, usually so seamless, but every once in a while you can spot something that lifts the veil. The episode opens with Triton and Ariel taking a chariot ride, observed by Ursula and the eels. Cool, Ursula gets to appear more than once a season, I wasn't sure. Ursula has the eels spy on Triton, see if he or anyone around him has a weakness that can be exploited. You'd think she'd know. She used to live in the palace, but maybe that was a very long time ago. Meanwhile, Sebastian is leading the Crab Scouts. Okay, I think I've seen these guys before. Maybe very, very briefly when I was very, very young. Maybe they didn't let me watch more than a few seconds of the episode. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure I have vague memories of this Crab Scouts scene. So there's 3 Crab Scouts, young crabs. 2 boys and a girl, so not gendered scouts. That's nice. And they're ugly. I don't like Sebastian's character design much either way, and on children, it's very off-putting. Every time I say Sebastian's name, my dog does a double take at me because that's his name. Hi, Sebastian. That's a good boy. And soon, Sebastian is visited by, the arch-rival the episode is about, I'm sure. An oversized, masculine, square-jawed crab by the name of Zeus. An old classmate of Sebastian's, apparently he's won some sort of Crab of the Year award, and is making his rounds. Sebastian introduces Zeus to King Triton, who is dealing with a housing shortage. At last a real political problem. Show's gonna make an ass of itself about it, isn't it? Yes, it did. Sebastian doesn't have a solution, but Zeus offers some suggestions relating to encouraging the growth of coral. I guess they live in houses grown from coral, or maybe I'm reading too much into that, and some space rationing to keep everyone comfortable until then. Sounds solid. Okay, they made it at least sound smart. I don't know if it would work, but Triton honors Zeus and goes forth with his idea. Later, we see Triton hanging out with all his daughters, each of them doing a different little hobby. One reading, two knitting, the chubby one is eating cookies, and another two are just kind of sitting there staring while Ariel listens as Sebastian conducts the mood music. Zeus takes over, and I don't think that's how conducting works, I'll say that much. He takes over as Sebastian stalks off to do some furious screaming in private. Oof, that's raw. Too real there, Little Mermaid. Sebastian confides in Ariel and Flounder that he's been competing with Zeus all his life, always losing. He needs to find something at which he can beat the guy. It's a burning need. Over dinner, he challenges Zeus to the Big Crab Challenge. Meanwhile, Ursula feels Sebastian might be the weak link she's looking for. While some octopus laborers are building a last-minute Big Crab Challenge arena, they uncover some kind of prehistoric glowing crystal. Zeus identifies it as a very old and rare treasure and tells the workers to keep it someplace safe. Then, when alone with Triton, tells him it's actually something magical and dangerous if its light is focused. Flotsam and Jetsam overhear this, and Ursula has her plan. She displays some strange self-awareness here that she's currently, technically a Saturday morning cartoon villain by proclaiming that Triton will pay for forgetting her birthday and then saying that she's going to indulge in some maniacal laughter before she does so. Ursula never really struck me as the type to go, card-carrying villain, but maybe it's not terribly incongruous. Meanwhile, Sebastian is exercising to prepare for the challenge. And okay, I've seen this scene as well. I don't remember anything about Zeus or Ursula or the challenge or the magic stone, but I have seen the Crab Scouts in this very scene that they were in earlier, and I've seen Sebastian's little exercise routine, his jumping jacks, sit-ups, and push-ups. Introduced me to the very concepts of jumping jacks, sit-ups, and push-ups when I was a wee lad. Ursula comes to Sebastian, shapeshifted into a crab version of herself. It's actually a pretty clever design. It works. She's claiming to be an enchantress who can give him the brains and the strength he needs to defeat Zeus, if he gives her the glowing stone, which of course Sebastian doesn't know has any actual power, so he sees it as a worthy price to pay. Pretty good setup. Sebastian asks Triton where the stone is. Triton says he got rid of it, bluffing that he just thought it was gaudy, buried it out in the wilderness, and Sebastian finds it far too easily. They could have had Triton be more specific. He'd have no reason to suspect Sebastian was after it or up to anything. The next morning, Crab Ursula meets with Sebastian again, gives him a placebo-ass super crab spell. Come on, surely Ursula would have the power and the decency to actually make Sebastian smart and strong. And she takes the glowy thing. I called it a crystal at first when it appeared because it looks like one, but the dialogue only ever calls it a stone, so I guess it's a stone. And Zeus mentioned earlier that the power of its focused light is to turn people into worms, because I've said this many times before, children's cartoon writers can't seem to think of any utility for magic other than turning people into animals, for good or for ill. The Crab Challenge begins, Sebastian being cheered on by his Crab Scouts and Ariel and Flounder. We have not seen a ton of Ariel and Flounder in this episode. Even in the few scenes they've actually been in, they've been rather superfluous, except for that one moment where Sebastian confided in them. Anyway, the Crab Scouts, at the Crab Challenge, Zeus wins every event. First a sort of luge, then a swimming race, then a burrowing race, because children's cartoon writers can't seem to think of any athletic events other than contests of speed. We're seeing a lot of things like that in this episode. The fourth event is a trivia contest, and Sebastian loses that one too. Ursula, meanwhile, forges a magic lantern that will enable her to focus the stone's magic. She tests it on Flotsam and Jetsam, turning them into worms. Yeah, I don't think this episode is really representing Ursula well. She's very out of character. I was okay with her, pettiness earlier and her indulging in evilness, but otherwise, she's being pretty out of character overall. Ursula is a deal maker. That's the trademark of Clements and Musker villains. She's not honest about who she is, but everything she actually outlines in her contracts is the truth. She would have actually given Sebastian the buffs he wanted. And she loves Flotsam and Jetsam. They're her poopsies. There's not minions that she abuses like in this episode. The fifth Crab Challenge event, that we see anyway, is a wrestling match, and you probably guessed by now, Zeus mops the floor with Sebastian. Next comes arm wrestling, during which Zeus, in his usual polite tones, pleads with Sebastian to call off the rest of the challenge, as he's making a fool of himself. Sebastian refuses. Hours later, Sebastian is still trying to cook up new challenges. As the next morning approaches and Zeus gets every question right in a Who Knows the Most About Sebastian contest, finally winning it by claiming Sebastian is about to scream, which Sebastian denies, but then does, ergo, Sebastian got one wrong. Meanwhile, Ursula assaults Atlantica's palace with her lantern, turning the guards into worms. When the competition is over, our heroes return to the throne room where Ursula is waiting to ambush them. She swats Sebastian aside and turns the lantern on the others. Ariel, Triton, and Flounder are wormified, but Zeus manages to dodge the beam. Ursula pursues him and he makes a quick calculation, standing in front of a mirror when she fires the beam at him. The beam is deflected back onto her lantern, shattering it and the stone, which, unsurprisingly, given Disney villain magic and its usual lack of ontological inertia, turns all the worms back into their true selves. Defeated, Ursula makes her escape. Sebastian is pretty bitter to learn that it was Zeus who saved the day, and Zeus, rather out of nowhere, says he knows one way Sebastian is superior. He points out the king, Ariel, Flounder, the Crab Scouts, the slug who's been following Sebastian around all episode. Points out Sebastian is good at making friends. All of Zeus's friends always end up as his rivals. Sebastian and Zeus have a good cry about the whole thing together and head to Sebastian's place for tea and cupcakes, making it a race as they do so. Okay, I'm more interested than usual in the end credits here. I have no idea who played Zeus, and I'd kind of like to find out who played the Crab Scouts as well. Oh boy, yeah, biggest cast list I've seen yet in this show. Let's try to figure this out. As always, we have Ariel, Sebastian, Flounder, and Triton up top, and then we have no less than 9 guest stars in alphabetical order. Okay, let's narrow down that list. Pat Carroll was obviously Ursula, and Patty Edwards was Flotsam and Jetsam. Jim Cummings, because the Seahorse Herald was in this episode, and I also heard him as one of the band members in the mood music scene. I'm seeing the names of J.D. Daniels. He was a well-known child actor at the time. I don't know if he ever did anything after being a child. He's best known, to me at least, for playing all of the child characters in Gargoyles. Also Andy McAfee, longtime voice actress who I'm pretty sure was a child at the time. She must have been the girl Crab Scout. And Malachi Pearson, I think I know that name. I think he was also a kid actor at the time, so that's the Crab Scouts. Where do I know Malachi Pearson from? Yeah, I'll find out later. That's 6 guest stars down, 3 more. Russi Taylor, the only female voices I heard in this episode besides Ariel is... it's kind of a Walla group thing in the scenes with Ariel's sisters. They didn't really have any lines, just some background chatter in a couple of scenes. Charlie Adler, I don't think he was Zeus. I guess he was small roles, like one of those octopus workers. And that leaves Mark Hamill. Was Zeus played by Mark Hamill and I didn't notice? Holy cow. I'm going to go back to give his voice another listen. Yeah, that's Mark Hamill. Wow. You forget sometimes, because for so long he's been typecast as insanely grating villain voices like that of the Joker that propelled him to voice-over stardom in the first place. And now that he's older, he actually does have a fairly raspy voice, but he's actually a very versatile performer. Zeus has these sort of cheesy game show host mannerisms, and yeah, I was trying to pinpoint his voice all episode long and never even approached guessing Mark Hamill, so... hats off to that guy. I love that guy. We share a birthday, you know, me and Hamill. Is he on my list of people I dream of working with? Son of a bitch, he's not. That's a dreadful oversight. Let me put his ass on there. Next episode is called Metal Fish. Okay, I haven't seen this episode, but I've heard about it, and I'm rather interested to see how it goes. I'm wondering how much of the plot can possibly be taken up by what I know to be true about the episode. Let's see. We open with some oddly sinister music. Reminds me a lot of certain Kingdom Hearts themes, Hollow Bastion themes mostly. As Flounder tags along with Ariel through some weedy wilderness, and nearby, Sebastian leads the Crab Scouts to a campsite. Hey, they weren't just a one-shot, that's good. Ariel and Flounder, as it turns out, are visiting a shipwreck, which is the home of someone named Archimedes. Ariel hopes to gift him with a human telescope she found. I guess Archimedes has a collection too, and Ariel sometimes donates to his instead of keeping all her human treasures for herself. Topside, we come upon a sailing ship where a fellow with long red hair is preparing to launch a ridiculously primitive fish-shaped submarine made of wood and bronze to explore the undersea world, wondering if he'll find merfolk down there. And this mysterious explorer is voiced by Mark Hamill again. Nice. I get the vibe they're holding off on revealing this character's name, so I know it, but I will do the same. Back on the seafloor, Ariel visits Archimedes, who's an older, gray-haired merman. I was expecting him to be something else, since Ariel implied that he's not welcome among merfolk. Apparently that's merely because, unlike Ariel, he never had the sense to keep his obsession with humans a secret. Not that Ariel keeps it too much of a secret, but he's got a very pleasant voice, provided by, screw it, I'm just looking it up now. Rod McEwen. Never heard of him. Looks like he's a musician, active since the late 50s, and this is one of the few acting jobs he's ever had. Fascinating. I'm guessing we're meant to take him for a special guest of sorts. I wonder what led to him getting this part. Archimedes not only knows the proper name of the telescope, is quite unlike Ariel, he knows the proper name of quite a few of his human treasures. Some, not all, but it's way better than what Ariel does, calling everything something majigger. Really annoying. Does he die or something? I mean, he should probably die. That'd be the only explanation for why Ariel has to rely on Scuttle by the time of the movie. If Ariel has a guy who actually knows about humans and is fond of them, that kind of sticks a wrench in how mystified she is later on. So yeah, some human stuff Archimedes knows about, like their statuary and pottery. He explains anchors to Flounder, and he has a piggy bank, which he knows is meant to hold coins, but he doesn't know what coins are for, or exactly what they call this little storage device. And he's met humans before, having saved the lives of some shipwrecked sailors once, who felt sure they were hallucinating since, as he explains to Ariel, humans believe merfolk to be a myth. Archimedes sympathizes with King Triton's belief that humans would destroy the merfolk world if they were ever to discover it was real, but Archimedes has more faith in the human soul, as Ariel does, only regretting that even if Triton would welcome the humans aren't actually capable of visiting the deep ocean. I'm liking this character. Very nuanced, very wise, and he turned the writing up a notch in his introductory scene there. Back with Sebastian, the Crab Scouts are using special mud as an adhesive for their shelter, which Sebastian resists since it's not in the Crab Scout manual. As he makes his shelter by the book, the three scouts pursue a butterfly-like sea creature. They identify it as a butterfly fish. I ain't calling it that. A butterfly fish is a real thing, and it's an actual fish, not some aquatic butterfly. Back on the surface, our red-headed explorer sets off in his submarine, accompanied by his cat, Penny. Ariel and Archimedes surface to test out the new telescope, and they see our mysterious explorer setting off in his great metal fish. The man drives around a bit, seeing the underwater world no human has ever seen before, and enjoying it very much, but one rivet in the submarine is loosened the tiniest bit, and it starts to spring the tiniest of leaks. Submarines are scary, man. Airplanes, too, now that I think about it. Cars. Basically all the big metal vehicles we entrust our lives to all the time. The slightest thing goes wrong. It's a pretty spooky world when you think about it. Meanwhile, Sebastian frantically searches the wilderness for the Crab Scouts. He has an encounter with a trio of teeny tiny sharks. It's kind of weird. That ends with him stranded in a little crevasse with a claw sprain that prevents him from swimming. But he calls for help, and the Crab Scouts save him, hoisting him up with a strand of seaweed. The metal fish, meanwhile, has malfunctioned, and Ariel pursues it as it careens to the seafloor. Meanwhile, Sebastian and the Crab Scouts report the sight of the mysterious human thing to Triton. Ariel peers into the porthole and gets her first good look at the explorer, and he sees her in return. He sees the mermaid. Soon enough, she's gone. Archimedes can tell that the sub is running out of air and that the human will die soon enough. So Ariel has to work out how to save him. Archimedes considers that only King Triton has the power to save the human now, and instantly he turns up with Sebastian and the Crab Scouts. The Scouts remind Sebastian of the Crab Scout oath to help everything under the sea. This guy qualifies. They want to help the human. Ariel and Archimedes, well, they struggle pretty hard to present Triton with the idea that saving a human's life is a good idea. This is all pretty contradictory to the movie, this whole story, in which Ariel says she's never seen a human so closely, and Triton's response to the moral issue of letting a human die is to fucking do it. One less human to worry about, his exact words. Sebastian, meanwhile, admits that obviously there's nothing in the manual about this, so it's time for the Scouts to think for themselves, and they seal the leak in the sub with the adhesive mud from before. Archimedes notes this is a temporary solution, and enough people make puppy dog eyes at Triton that he submits to use his magic to propel the device back to the surface. Archimedes admits that maybe we're not ready for human-merfolk relations just yet. The explorer is picked up by his ship and heads back to, I want to say Copenhagen? Because as we learn when he's approached by two young children in the street, he's none other than Hans Christian Andersen, author of The Little Mermaid. He reads a passage from his new book to the gathered crowd of children, and I think it's a real passage. I think it's the real opening paragraph of The Little Mermaid. Surprisingly, we get Ken Mars narrating us a little educational lecture about Hans Christian Andersen and his works, which you can find at your local library. Yeah, tacky. And then it ends for realsies with Ariel sitting on a rock in the exact pose of the famous Little Mermaid statue in Copenhagen. And for some weird reason, she's a background painting, except her hair blowing in the wind. I don't like it. Not a good effect. Pretty cheesy ending, and that resolution was a bit too fast-paced for my liking. And it gunks up the film's continuity big time. I mean, heck, even the first Kingdom Hearts game made sure that Ariel never knowingly encountered a human, so that her motivation would stay consistent if they ever continued her story, which they did, but had her completely forget that she knows Ursula is a bad guy in the process. But I like the basic idea, and I do appreciate how Ariel and Andersen never actually speak to each other, so it's still a very mysterious encounter for the both of them. Andersen sees very little of what his oceanic rescuers are doing to save him. So Ariel inspired the story of The Little Mermaid, which in reality inspired her. Ugh. Twisty time there. And how could Andersen write a story about a mermaid seeking love on land with help from a sea witch when that hasn't actually happened to Ariel yet, much less in a way that he'd ever hear about it? I'm overthinking the fuck out of this. It's cute, and it's charming. Cast list. We have our four leads as always. Mark Hamill as Andersen, Rod McEwen as Archimedes. The Crab Scouts are once again played by J.D. Daniels, Andy McAfee, and Malachi Pearson. The children who approach Andersen in Copenhagen are played by Ashley Peldon and Bradley Pierce. Though whoever submitted this episode to the IMDb is under the impression that Pierce was the third Crab Scout, and that Peldon played both of the children in the ending, Pearson doesn't get IMDb credit for this episode at all. And finally, there's Frank Welker, who I guess was Penny, but I don't recall Penny ever making any actual sounds. Did Hans Christian Andersen really have a cat named Penny? He must have. Why would they invent that for this episode, you know? Why would they arbitrarily have him bring a cat along if the real Andersen didn't really have one? I'ma Google it. Did Hans Christian Andersen... Autocomplete asks, did Hans Christian Andersen write Snow White? No, he did not. That was the Brothers Grimm. Did Hans Christian Andersen have... Autocomplete asks, siblings? A wife? Don't care. Did he have a cat? No informative results for if he had a cat, so I guess giving him one as a sidekick here was just Disney being Disney, though evidently his first short story, A Journey on Foot from Holman's Canal to the East Point of a Major, had a talking cat in it. Also, Andersen wrote The Little Mermaid in 1837 and died in 1875, and the Disney version takes place in the 1890s, but screw it, you know, I doubt that 1890s timeline is canon in the slightest. It's probably just devoted fans picking shit out and taking a guess, you know, based on architecture and human technology and whatnot. Yeah. Shit, like that. Next episode, our final episode today, is the Season 2 finale, though again, I'm sure there's nothing especially finale-ish about it. It's called Thank You for that, Ariel. That's kind of racist, but I remember this one. It's all about magic and size shifting, and from what I remember, it's very, very exciting. Let's see. More thoughts from the theme song, I fucking love the steel drum. It's such a fascinating and unique instrument. That plunky sound it makes, kind of a wibbly. It's just a perfect representation of the tropics and islands, and it's just really cool. We open with Ariel doing some high-intensity shopping. Radical, yo. And she's with Flounder and Urchin. Hey, it's Urchin. He hasn't been seen in Season 2 at all up until this point. Coming back for the finale, are we? It's classy, bro. It's real classy. Sebastian discovers that the puppeteer at the marketplace has once again not showed up for work, to the disappointment of some gathered octopus children. So Sebastian puts on the puppet show himself, doing a little skit about Triton battling the Cyclops, before crossing paths with the shopping trio and joining them. The score is on point these past couple episodes. They've had really good background music, which I complimented in the first episode, but it's still good. Still good. At the market, Sebastian reflects on being a very small crab in a world made for merfolk-sized people. I imagine that's a pretty big recurring theme in Keys and Kingdoms, which I didn't mention at all in the first 2 episodes. Whoops. Well, that's what the retrospective of the retrospective is for. Retrospective number 10 is where I look back at all the episodes for Keys and Kingdoms canon ideas. But yeah, the Keys and Kingdoms world has, pixies, mishkas, gnomes, all sorts of very diminutive people who have to make their way in the world. No teeny tiny crab people, though. I've been assuming through all this that Sebastian can be represented by an actual crab who, might have the same problems. Whether he's an awakened crab or just an ordinary crab whom the merfolk can talk to because merfolk can do that. Fact remains, he's just not adapted for this world, even if, as they say, evolution does indeed eventually turn everything into a crab. Urchin does some shopping at Maury's cart. Urchin, why the fuckity fuck are you buying from Maury again? I don't think he's recurring character material, buddy, but yep, there he is again. Urchin finds a game called Canyons and Currents, this alleged game consisting entirely of words written on a scroll. Did he just find a role-playing game book? Well played. Maury also hands him a seashell, which I'm guessing is where the dice are. Urchin invites the others back to his place to play the game. I don't imagine this is an RPG episode. We need to get the plot going. Maury, once again, offers our heroes a map leading to a wondrous adventure. Please throw in some mistrust there, would you? Kids can handle the idea that the heroes have met Maury before and remember what happened then. And I'm guessing the reason he's offering them adventure and the chance to become great knights and wizards is because they've just bought Canyons and Currents, an RPG adventure game, and he thinks they might be interested in real adventure. I'm just guessing. They don't say what Canyons and Currents is actually about. This being the early 90s, if I know my timeline of the RPG hobby. So this would be after D&D came out in the late 70s. Introduced the concept of role-playing games as a whole. And then there was the nationwide moral panic that it was satanic and that the players couldn't distinguish fantasy from reality. That was an early 80s thing. I'm guessing it was probably fairly dead by the time this episode aired. But maybe... I think this was before D&D became considered something that nerds do. That wasn't always the case. Remember that scene early in Steven Spielberg's E.T., where the hero's perfectly normal big brother and his not remotely nerdy friends are playing some D&D. The notion that it was for nerds came later, but perhaps by the early 90s it had faded into obscurity, hence why D&D is referenced here, but they don't really go into any detail about it because an adventure RPG would be a foreign concept to the child audience. Like, I know that when the Dungeons & Dragons movie came out in the year 2000, a lot of critics wondered why they'd make a movie adaptation of a game no one's played since the late 70s. An inaccurate statement, plenty of people had been playing it, but it's proof that it really wasn't mainstream at the time and hadn't been for a while. 2000 is also the same year as 3rd edition was released. That probably caused a resurgence, since 2nd edition had been around since 89. That was rambly as fuck. Anyway, Ariel refuses to buy on account of what happened last time he sold them a map, which she recaps in detail. Okay, good, continuity. It's your friend, everybody likes it. It's going to be the first retrospective to be over 30 minutes. No, the previous one was over 30 minutes, but it looks like this one's going to be the longest by a good margin. Anyway, so yeah, they don't take the map, and holy shit, they're at Urchin's house playing Canyons and Currents. Do it. And I'm thinking, I'm thinking not a role-playing game at all. The case that came with the scroll does not contain dice, but small figurines to use as game pieces. I remember this scene now. Yeah, Flounder chooses the shark, Ariel chooses the seahorse, and that's all that was in. Urchin grumbles about Maury selling him an incomplete set, but decides that he and Sebastian can play the game if Sebastian acts as Urchin's game token. So, not a role-playing game at all. It's a perfectly ordinary board game, and I gushed about the show, including a D&D reference, for no reason. No reason at all. I mean, maybe not. I mean, two alliterative plural nouns connected by an ampersand. What was it? Canyons and currents? Yeah, I mean, that's got to be a Dungeons and Dragons reference, right? Everything that's two plural nouns connected by an ampersand is a Dungeons and Dragons reference, especially since, a canyon is a bit like a dungeon, and I'm just saying. It was a reference, just not a very in-depth one. Anyway, Sebastian is very offended by Urchin's suggestion of using him as a game token and storms off, enraged at how small and slow he is and how disrespected he is for it. Later, Urchin and Flounder visit Ariel in the dead of night. Urchin reveals that he went back to Maury and swapped the game for the map to the magic cave, thinking they can use its magic to make Sebastian bigger. Ariel's all for the adventure, and Flounder has his reservations, but is willing to do it for Sebastian. They skip over the journey itself. They find their way there easily enough, and the mouth of the cave is, well, it's an actual mouth. The cave is a person, not unlike the Cave of Wonders from Aladdin, only, less impressive. The cave banters with him a bit, then explains that all you need to do is enter his mouth, though only one may do so, and you'll become an immensely powerful sorcerer. Urchin is uneasy about the experience, so it's Ariel who enters the cave, emerging as a mighty sea witch. You can tell because she has a crown and a cape now. And a wand. You need a wand to be a sea witch. Of course, you'd think under the sea they just call it a witch. No, I'm not letting that go. I don't think undersea people would attach the prefix sea to everything. It's annoying. And I think little kids would take notice of how annoying it is. Witchy Ariel visits a sleeping Sebastian and tries to cast her spell. She's not sure how it works, so she always casts her spells by saying things like, "Magic makes Sebastian big," which I think is kind of cool. It's a kind of a neat verbal component. It doesn't seem like anything happens, so Ariel hangs up her witchy accessories and goes back to bed, annoyed at the waste of time. The next morning, it turns out to have worked. Sebastian is now about the same size as Flounder and is overjoyed. He doesn't have long to ponder the wonderful possibilities, because in a few seconds he's bigger than Ariel, and a minute or so after that he's an absolute giant. He seems to hold stable at about 20 feet tall for some time, and he uses his size to help farmers harvest their crops, save citizens from sharks, and swing people around in giant baskets like a carnival ride. He's pretty happy, and the Atlanticans adore him. Later on, Sebastian has gained another 10 to 15 feet in height or so. He's even bigger, and he and Ariel have to admit that this isn't going so well. For one thing, he now has to eat way too much to be sustainable, and he can't visit Ariel in her room properly anymore. He requests to still be big enough to protect people from sharks, but small enough to function in society. Ariel puts on her witch accoutrement again and makes such a request of her magic, very specifically wording it as Sebastian did. Bigger than a shark, but smaller than a whale. This being the kind of magic that, clearly messes with you a bit if you word your wishes poorly, that was a very good wording that you couldn't really mess up too badly. But it does nothing. Ariel seems to have no power anymore. Sebastian does not get smaller, and indeed, sometime later he's absolutely humongous, causing a panic as he miserably walks through the streets of Atlantica. Looks like they throw out a couple of shout-outs to 50s monster movies throughout the scene. Not to any one movie in particular, just the generic atmosphere of such things. Sebastian is big enough now that he can barely see or hear anyone, and after he nearly crushes Flounder and finds himself disconcerted about how small a whale is in comparison to himself, Ariel, Urchin, and Flounder take Sebastian to visit the magic cave again and ask it why Ariel's magic isn't working anymore. The cave sees Big Sebastian and explains that she's expended all of her energy on that single spell, and the magic power he grants can only be recharged during a full moon, so she'll get her power back then. The cave then falls asleep, his information useless to Ariel because, well, she's never heard of the moon. I'm sure if I cared to look, I'd find that to be a grievous continuity error, but I don't got that kind of time. Sometime later, for the safety of the community, Sebastian leaves Atlantica. Soon, he hits another growth spurt, one that makes him so huge that he breaks the surface of the water. And a fishing vessel spots the giant crab and immediately starts harpooning him, hoping to make a fortune on crab meat. Ariel overhears one of the fishermen remark that they're fortunate it's a full moon night so they can see what they're doing. Understanding now what the moon is, she asks the magic to make Sebastian his old self. It makes him elderly. A remark from Ariel that she wishes there weren't any humans around turns all the humans into fish, so apparently her magic reacts to actually making wishes as well. So she exclaims, "I wish none of this had ever happened." Time reverses to when Ariel, Urchin, and Flounder first approach the magical cave, and they decide against going inside. The three of them then return to Sebastian and shower him with love, assuring him that even though he's not a big crab, they care about him very much and love him just the way he is. So it's ambiguous exactly what's going on here. Clearly Sebastian and the cave don't remember what happened before Ariel turned back time, but Ariel, Flounder, and Urchin might? Or maybe the wish just put it in their heads that they needed to try a different approach, So yeah, maybe nobody has any memory of the big Sebastian timeline. Kind of interesting. But still learned their lesson because Ariel made her wish that it wouldn't happen, so it didn't by putting a different mindset in them. I'm overthinking again, bro. End credits. Triton wasn't in this episode, so only 3 main cast members and 4 guest stars. We got Danny Cooksey as Urchin, Dave Coulier as Morey, and then Greg Berger, his name misspelled. He spells his first name with a double G, they mess it up, and Nick Jameson. I don't know enough about either of those actors to take a guess at which of them played the cave. IMDb doesn't say. It says that Berger played the fishing boat captain, but doesn't mention Jameson or the cave at all. Disney Wiki, same deal. Too bad, the cave was fun, and, if Greg Berger was the boat captain, then Nick Jameson was probably the cave, I don't know. Okay, that was Season 2. Thoughts on the season itself? Well, there was no evil manta this season. All seasons should include an evil manta, but that's okay. I know he returns in Season 3 at least once. In fact, a moment ago, I thought he returned at least twice, but as it turns out, no. The 2 remaining plot lines I remember him having were actually both from the same episode. How about that? So it's possible we may only see him once more in the series finale. Someone I'm pretty sure we won't be seeing again is the Lobster Mobster. From the look of his wiki page, he was purely a Season 1 villain. And I'm wondering how many more times Ursula will appear. I know of one more plot she takes part in. Wasn't my thoughts on the season, was it? So much as it was me wishing that we got to see more of the villains. Hey, when you got a good rogues gallery, you got a good thing going. And this show, it's got a pretty good roster of villains, actually. There are other good characters out there, too, I know that Gabriella also returns in the same episode as the Ursula one I'm thinking of, and Ariel's sisters. Yeah, we've seen a lot less of them than I had anticipated, All the wikis say that each one has like an official voice actress in the show, but thus far, only half of them have had any dialogue. I wonder if we'll get like a whole bunch of Ariel's sisters in Season 3. Pearl was awesome. I wish Pearl had more episodes. But, here I am wishing for a bunch of side characters. I guess, what we want from a show is to get more value out of our actual stars, out of Ariel and Flounder and Sebastian and Triton, I had a feeling while doing this episode that, Sebastian steals the show a bit too much, I think. There you go, then. Let's move on to Season 3 and see some motherfucking dinosaurs, shall we? I know you've been waiting for that one. I know I have. Let's see if it's as weird as we remember. Overall thoughts on Season 2. Virtually indistinguishable from Season 1. This is an episodic series, after all. They kind of stick to the status quo. Though just last night, I got a comment on a conversation I was having with Sadie in the comment section of Retrospective number 4 from someone named Gene, who tells me that the 3rd season goes all out with really bizarre storylines. Let's see if that's true. Hello, Gene. If you're still here, good to see you. If I'm not mistaken, your comment was the first comment this channel has ever gotten from a stranger. So thank you so much. I hope to see more of you. Okay, Patreon bumper thingy coming up. Be sure to follow the directions on it and 40-minute mark. And check out the website and the Facebook, or not. There's not really anything to see there, but at the moment, except my blog, the website and the Facebook can link you to my blog. There's some pretty cool stuff to read over there, maybe. Anyway, see you next time, folks. Thanks for sticking around. TAPAS and Stuff Productions is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon, including Knight Sadie Allen.